All right. Well, welcome everyone to Transparency International's 26th annual general meeting. My name is Susan Cote-Freeman, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the chair of TI Canada for the next 2 hours, and then I will be giving the chair over to our next chair. But it's my pleasure to chair this meeting. I just wanted to explain for those of you who are not familiar with the format of our AGM, the first hour is actually a public meeting that's open to anyone. The second hour, which we'll try to start at 1 p.m. on the dot, is a meeting for the paid up members of TI Canada. So I would ask the general public, if there are any members of the general public, after after we've had our hour with Rita, to exit the call, and then we'll proceed to the business of the organization. We have the pleasure of Rita's presence here. I'm going to leave it to James to make introductions. James is having a chat with Rita, who's going to tell us all about business journalism in 2023. So James, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody for joining the annual general meeting, our keynote presentation. It's a real pleasure today to have Rita Trichur, columnist for the Globe and Mail, join us. I'm used to being on calls with Rita where she's interviewing me, and now she has the pleasure to finally talk about herself rather than just be listening. But for those who don't know Rita and her excellent work at the Globe and Mail, I'd just like to give a bit of background. Rita is an award-winning journalist. She's a senior business writer and columnist with the Globe and Mail. She previously served as the newspaper's financial services editor. Rita returned to the Globe and Mail in July 2016 after spending 2.5 years as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. She primarily covered Canadian banks and insurance companies from Toronto, but also wrote a variety of other stories for the US newspaper. Prior to the Wall Street Journal, Rita spent more than 3 years working as a general assignment reporter in the Report on Business, covering the telecom beat. Rita has also covered financial services and economics for the Toronto Star and has held various roles at the Canadian Press and the Ottawa Sun. She got her first byline at the age of 6 when the Toronto Star published her short story about a fish-stealing cat and paid her $10. I want to hear what the ramifications and the impact of that journalism was. She has a Bachelor of Journalism and Political Science and an MA in the Canadian Studies, both from Carleton University and in Ottawa. Rita, thank you so much for joining us today as our keynote speaker for our annual general meeting.
Rita, why don't you get started? Tell us a little bit about your journalism career and how it all started, and how you got to covering the issues that are so dear to us.
Okay, so you already heard about how I wrote a story for the Toronto Star about the fish stealing cat. And so, after I got the check for $10, I was, that blew my mind. And I was talking to my dad and I said, $10, they pay people to write stories? And my father says, yeah, that's what journalists do. And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, I'm going to be a journalist when I grow up. And my parents thought, oh, she's going to grow out of this, but I never did. So that's basically how I got into journalism. I got into business journalism around 2004, 2005. And, to be honest, it was mostly because I was looking around thinking everybody wants to be a political journalist. But I found political coverage to be kind of boring. It seemed to be very repetitive about he said this, she said that, and I just was kind of becoming disenchanted with the idea of political journalism. And I started looking around and observing and determined that the real power brokers in Canada really seemed to be in the business community. And it was a world in which I don't come from. So, of course, journalists are people watchers. So I was fascinated by this very privileged group of individuals, and really the weight of the decisions that they make has impact on the entire country. So my curiosity started at that point in terms of wanting to get into business journalism. And, I ran into some obstacles along the way. The first business reporter or business editor that I encountered was at the Canadian Press. fellow by the name of John Valorzi, who is now deceased, but I approached John as an eager 20-something, and I said, John, I really want to become a business reporter. Are you going to give me a shot? And he kind of laughed me off, and he says, it's really hard. There's some math involved. And I was just like, oh, great. So he gave me this list of tasks that he wanted me to complete before he would give me a chance of becoming a business reporter in his section. And he says, when you've done all these things in a year, come talk to me and then we'll see. So because this, very old school, stubborn man had decided that I wasn't good enough for this, I took this as, of course, more of a challenge. So I completed the list, and then I cornered him in the elevator one day and I said, look, I've done all the things you said. Now are you going to give me a chance? And he was a bit taken aback by the fact that I'd cornered him in an elevator and, had come back to him, and he said, okay, I'll give you a 2-week try, but if you can't hack it, don't come crying to me after. So anyway, the 2 weeks never ended. It's continued on. And that's basically how I got my start into business journalism. Did you ever think that you'd be covering white collar crime as a business reporter? And so the answer to that is no. That's not something that I ever really thought about. There were the stories about accounting irregularities, of course, that were arising, but beyond that, this wasn't something that I thought about. Now, I started down this road because when I was at the Wall Street Journal, there was a story that I wrote about RBC. It had made Latin America a huge focus of its wealth management division, I believe, starting in 2008. And then very abruptly, many years later, decided that they were shutting down their wealth management division. And they had put out what was, a pretty plain vanilla news release about the fact that they were shutting down this, the focus on Latin America in particular. And, I wrote a routine story, didn't think much of it until I got a call from a whistleblower who said to me, that's not the real story. Do you want to know what the real story is? And so I was intrigued and I said, of course. And it turned out it had to do with problems with money laundering controls in their Miami office. The American regulator, in this case, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, had been alerted to problems with controls. There were issues with particular clients who were in Latin America, one of which I wrote about. It was the one example that we had cited was a Brazilian senator who had been charged with corruption, but this banker at RBC in Miami had helped him launder money after he had been formally charged. And so it was a big problem. It turned into this big regulatory issue. And so that was kind of my first kind of foray into it, was this investigative piece on, Royal Bank of Canada's misadventures in Latin America and the issues that they were having in that particular office, which they ended up closing with respect to their money laundering controls.
We'll see if Zoom lets me ask one question before it cuts me off again. Rita, and thanks for that background on the business journalism and the white collar crime. It's interesting to hear you talk about whistleblowers, and we have David Hutton on the call with us, who won the Canadian Integrity Award from TI Canada last year for his work on whistleblowers. I want to diverge a little, since you brought it up, I want to diverge from some of our questions a little bit to talk to you about the importance of whistleblowers to your work, and what's the relationship when a whistleblower calls you up about how you or the Globe and Mail needs to treat a whistleblower and what protections there are, and do you create a relationship? Is there follow-up, and how do you ensure their safety? Do you have a responsibility as a journalist for their safety?
Well, this is, of course, something that we think about as journalists. I mean, the safety of whistleblowers, is something that it affects us. As we're supposed to be neutral, objective, and fair in our reporting. But yeah, we do worry. I mean, we're still human beings. Of course, we worry about the safety of whistleblowers. Look, each whistleblower that I've dealt with has been different. Some take a very long time for them to feel comfortable enough to tell you who they actually are. And that can take months. I've had instances where, the person has given me, a pseudonym, and then I say, I need to be able to, while we are not naming you in the story. And I have to say that the Globe and Mail has become very, very strict in terms of, we only offer confidentiality to people in very rare circumstances. Like, we're not supposed to, we're supposed to be pretty rigorous about when we allow people to offer information to us and present it in a story, without their names being put to it. And the reason for that is, we don't want the public to mistrust what we're doing as journalists. We want to be as transparent as possible with our readers about how we got the information. And so in the rare cases where we do use confidential sources, it has to be vetted by masthead editors. We have to get approval for that. And so the last series of stories that I wrote about, Saadi Gaddafi's penthouse condo in Toronto, and how he had hatched this plot to sell it. We did offer confidentiality to 2 sources in that piece who were instrumental to that piece. But we stated very clearly in the story, it was because their personal safety was at risk if we were to name them. And so that's a pretty high bar. And also, they were not authorized to speak publicly about the matter. And so, in these cases, like I said, we tell the sources, we need to be able to demonstrate as journalists to our masthead editors and to the company's lawyers, that lawyer or copy, that we have conducted our due diligence, that we understand why you're coming forward, that you are who you say you are. So there is a pretty high bar on that, even if we don't name the people publicly. I mean, the promise is, I will protect you to the fullest extent of the law. I mean, there's no such thing as absolute blanket coverage. I mean, there's, no law is perfect on this account. Journalists will protect their sources. And I mean, there's certain things that I intend to take with me to the grave. So my most confidential sources that's something that nobody, aside from my editors, of course, and our lawyers would be aware of their identities. And we take lots of precautions as journalists in terms of how we communicate with the sources. But there is really an element of trust there. People have to get to know you. They have to trust you. That can take an awfully long time. I have found that confidential sources actually will spend months investigating you as a journalist, reading everything that you've written to try to get a sense of who you are, how you've handled these issues in the past. They'll ask other people about you before they will even come forward to you on a confidential basis. Even if they're presenting you with a pseudonym, for that first reach out, they've done their homework on you.
Great, thanks for letting us know about the background process of how you handle sources and whistleblowers. Going back to white collar crime itself and you being on the beat, I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about why you didn't go into political journalism. On the corruption side and the scandal side, do you find that there is a difference between covering white collar crime compared to, say, political corruption or any other forms of crime itself? Like, do you talk to colleagues on the homicide beat at the Globe and Mail? Do you compare notes of what it's like to cover crime, and what differences do you see?
Well, early on in my career, I started off like every student, listening to the police scanners on the police desk at the Ottawa Sun, right? Some people started off in the radio room at the Toronto Star, but like every kind of news organization at that time had these police scanners. So you would be able to hear when there was news that you should be following up on. And there was just much more awareness of, when just say a murder took place, or if there was, even a school bus crash or a massive car accident, you would hear about it earlier. I find that with white collar crime, it's completely different. It's not as evident that something has gone wrong. Certainly companies will do everything that they can not to disclose the full details of what's happening. And I find that unlike, just say in the case of crime involving, weapons, as an example, a shooting, there's a lack of political will that I have observed as a journalist when it comes to really getting to the root causes and solving these problems. And so all of those things make it much more difficult for reporters to find out about white cases of white collar crime, and then develop the necessary sources to report out those stories.
Mm-hmm. So picking up on the point about whistleblowers and this access to knowing what's going on, outside of a whistleblower coming to you, if you're, how do you pick up a new case about white collar crime? Is there a hunch? Is it from organizations like us writing about something? Is it a trend you're noticing? What other ways are leading you to investigate?
I mean, so it's a wide variety of ways. I mean, in some cases, we'll, get an email through like Proton Mail or some anonymous, email. Sometimes sources will send us things anonymously through our secure drop system that we have at the Globe, which is an isolated computer that's only connected to this one system. But the information eventually makes its way to reporters. Sometimes it's from very long-term source relationships. Usually it's meeting people in person who you've known for a really long time. People are pretty skittish about talking over the phone or on electronic devices. They're worried about electronic trails. So meeting people in person in kind of obscure locations that are out of the public eye are things that I have done quite a bit. But it's also based on reports that organizations such as Transparency International have put out, following up on a story, even a few months after the initial news has broken, to see, what else is out there. What else do we need to know about this topic? There's a variety of ways that we do it.
Great. And you were alluding to, in one of your answers, the political will to fight white collar crime. Over the years that you've been covering this, and there's official statistics about 42 to $115 billion are laundered through Canada every year. Not to say that that's the only part of white collar crime, but that gives us some kind of sense. As a reporter, what do you think? What's the scale of white collar crime in Canada? Because from my perspective as ED of TI Canada, our chair Susan and I have debated this over the years, that we kind of get feedback of the spectrum. There's those who just think, well, Canada is nice, pure Canada, corruption doesn't happen here. And then I actually get the comment sections to things we write saying we're the most corrupt country on the face of the planet, worse than the lowest rung, and there's no way Canada should even be in the top 50 least corrupt countries. So where in that mix, your professional journalism opinion, does Canada lie?
I mean, I think it's much bigger than the official imprecise statistics that we have would suggest. I think it's a much bigger problem. I think it's a bigger problem because people don't like to admit that it's going on here. And there's not a lot of disclosure from regulatory entities about the problems that they do uncover. There's not a lot of discussion about this, in kind of political circles. I mean, it's much easier for politicians to be focused on the election cycle and kind of, quick quotes that will score them political points on kind of, lesser topics or things that are more populist. I mean, this is a hard problem to solve. But we need to solve it, because I think that this actually is an ideal place to commit crimes, because the likelihood of getting caught is pretty slim. So I worry that it's actually a much bigger problem than anyone is willing to admit. I worry that part of the lack of political will that we've observed from politicians at various levels is because our economy has become so hooked on this dirty money and so dependent on it that there is a worry that it could be destabilizing if we were to tackle it in any real way. But I think that this isn't the kind of financing that we want in our economies. I think that the money is, it's not money that stays here, it's money that passes through Canada. I think it comes with a lot of danger. And I really worry about the scale of financial crime in Canada. I mean, I worry about sanctions evasion. That's a very topical issue right now. I mean, it's one thing to put in place sanctions, but when there's no way to really monitor whether shell companies are being created in real time and who's behind them and whether funds are flowing into them from abroad, then we should be very worried. We should be very worried that our country is being taken advantage of. I mean, as a G7 country, I think we need to do a lot better.
Right, and so you're talking about some of the key problem areas in TI Canada. We've addressed some of those. Bill C-42 for beneficial ownership registry is almost through to the Senate now. We'll see if it makes it through before Parliament goes on recess. Of course, it's only at the federal level. We need provincial registries. TI Canada is also really pushed on remediation agreements, and we endorsed them when they came out, and we're pushing for their reform so that they're more transparent. Those are two kind of big tools we've talked about. Are there, and you've covered some of these, and you and I have had great conversations. Are there other tools you think that we're not focusing on enough, or that Canadians need to think? Because as you say, this isn't always a sexy topic. It gets technical. So someone who's been in the weeds and really analyzed the legislation that's allowing for the gaps to happen, it's great to hear from someone like you who might have some other insights.
I just feel like the consultation paper that Finance put out, at the beginning of this month, although I wrote a column last week about the information sharing aspect of it, this idea that the government is considering enhancing information sharing between banks, and then also between the federal entities and banks. I mean, that part is promising, but I didn't get a sense after reading that 92 or 93 page document that what we are seeing here is a comprehensive overhaul of how things are done in Canada. It seemed to me like more incremental change. I think what was really missing from that paper was something that was flagged in the 2018 parliamentary committee report on this, which was we should be moving to a suspicious activity reporting system in Canada. There was no mention of that in that consultation document. Suspicious transaction reports from everyone that I've talked to, it's a harder way of trying to crack these financial crimes. My understanding from speaking to so many experts is that suspicious activity report, that kind of a regime, makes it easier for law enforcement to connect the dots. The other thing that I'm concerned about, and you've kind of touched on it, is this is a federal initiative to overhaul some of the federal laws, which is great, but we really need buy-in from the provinces on a range of different issues. Not just the beneficial ownership issue, because that's key. Obviously, the vast majority of these shell corporations are incorporated provincially, but also on the matters of policing. Is there going to be a sustained effort across Canada to tackle this issue in a meaningful way? It can't just be considered a federal problem. It's not just a federal problem. And while it's great that we, in the last budget, we finally saw some, forceful language from the federal government on the need to tackle this issue, that in itself is a change, and that's encouraging, but we really need to see a sustained effort from across the country, and that's missing.
Mm-hmm. On this point about the federal provincial divide, if we turn to the actual coverage of white collar crime in Canada, there is that point. TI Canada, we sit in Toronto, you sit in Toronto with the Globe Mail, but it's the national paper. Do you think that the issue of white collar crime is nationally viewed enough, or is it regional? And the example I would give is, we had that there was a Charbonneau Commission in Quebec, and Anglophone Canada, of course, saying, oh, it's Quebec. And I don't know your views on it, but Maclean's puts up that cover of Quebec as a special issue, which I think did more harm than good. And then the Cullen Commission happens in BC. And of course, sitting on Ontario, we're like, oh, well, that's the BC issue. And it got a little bit of national coverage, but of course, in BC, it got major coverage. Do you think that white collar crime journalists or corruption journalists get the national nature of this, or are we regionalized in our coverage?
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think the coverage is far too regionalized. I mean, oh, it's a Vancouver problem or it's a BC problem. Yeah, there's a lot of finger pointing to Quebec from Ontario. But listen, I'm sitting in the country's financial capital of Toronto right now. And anyone who thinks that our capital markets, our banking system, which is largely headquartered here, isn't vulnerable to abuse is fooling themselves. And I think that, you know, part of the problem is when you think of traditional business journalists who cover banks, like traditional banking reporters, they may not see this as a key part of their beat. Because it's a little bit, you know, it's not about corporate earnings. It's not about, you know, mergers and acquisition strategies necessarily. But it's what I consider a serious operational and reputational risk for not just, you know, major financial institutions, but a range of different businesses. You know, I wrote about human trafficking and the money laundering behind human trafficking. I mean, that touches almost every sector from airlines to transportation, you know, trucking companies, to the hospitality industry, restaurants. I think that to a certain extent, some of these issues have been miscast also as a banking or real estate industry problem. I don't think that that's a fair characterization. I think we need to do a better job of journalists in showing how pervasive it is and how it touches various sectors of our economy.
And do you think that now looking at nationally, writ large, does Canadian media understand and cover white collar crime enough? And I go back to I think it was in the height of the political fallout of remediation agreements with SNC-Lavalin. I believe it was Paul Wells maybe wrote something in Maclean's or somewhere else about, you know, there are these two sides of Canada and we just don't see the other side, the rules that work for some. And I just thought, but you're a journalist, cover it more if that's the case. That's your duty. Do you think it's covered enough, or is it too, if not, what are the reasons that it's not covered enough?
Well, I mean, look, media is in a state of decline in this country. I don't think the topic is covered enough. Absolutely. I think part of, you know, the problem is, though, the shrinking that we're seeing in terms of the ranks of reporters. I mean, that's every news organization at some point has gone through rounds of layoffs. You know, I'm not somebody who will sit here and look at my competitors in terms of, you know, newspapers and television and broadcast outlets, radio broadcast outlets, and think, oh, okay, well, weekend competitors are good. I mean, absolutely not. A weekend competitor, you know, makes the strongest players lazy and complacent, so we can't afford that. You need to have curious, fiercely independent journalists who are backed by, you know, owners who believe in independent journalism. In that way, I'm in a very privileged position here at the Globe. I mean, they basically let me write about whatever I want. You know, I mean, this is a passion of mine, but I also know that it is a passion of our masthead editors, the editor-in-chief, in particular, David Wamsley, has told me, you need to keep going on these stories. I mean, you have my full support. You know, not every journalist receives that kind of backing from people, senior leaders in their newsrooms. And we have owners that believe in independent journalism and continue to invest in it. You know, I feel very, very lucky to be here and to be able to do this kind of work. Unfortunately, the broader industry is, you know, these are tough days. These are tough times for journalists. So having that ability, the freedom, the support, the resources to be able to pursue these stories is becoming increasingly a challenge. And having the knowledge about how banks work. I mean, some of these institutions are, businesses are impenetrable sometimes. I mean, it's really difficult to get up to speed on what is actually going on, because you have to be able to write authoritatively.
Mm-hmm. And just on the point about declining newsrooms in Canada, we discussed this at our event in Toronto, our Day of Dialogue last fall, about the connection of local newspapers in small towns and them as a front line of oversight of governance in smaller communities where there can be local cases of corruption, or some of these national cases, especially money flows, can impact these small communities that don't have the resources to cover them. Rita, looking at all this, and you touched on this, I think, a little bit in some of your opening remarks about the editor who wasn't giving you the time of day to cover business. Do you feel, as a woman, and a woman of color in particular, have you faced any particular challenges on this beat of anti-corruption, or do you find it a collaborative community? Or do you feel just you're the same as any other journalist and it hasn't affected you?
I say that it's, in the beginning, it affected me more than now. I think initially, when you start to meet people in the community, they're skeptical of who you are and why you're interested in it, and are you seriously interested in this, or is this just kind of a fleeting interest? Are you looking for clicks? I mean, people have said that sort of thing to me, but that might be the case for all journalists. I'll say, in terms of being a woman, covering banks as a woman, you'll always get that one banker who just talks down to you because they just figure you're stupid. You don't know as much. But I have stopped being angry about that, and I have this piece of advice that I give to other young women who are interested in this, is that turn a perceived weakness into a strength. Sometimes when these men talk down to you, they end up telling you too much because they figure you're just, you don't know anything. And so then it actually leads to more information. Other times you have to do a little bit of intellectual judo, like if a banker says, oh, I can't talk to you about something, because my PR people have told me that I can't. I mean, a very effective thing for, I've told other journalists, particularly women, to say is, really, you don't have you're not able to speak for yourself. Are you going to really let that person control what you have to say? Imagine telling some macho banker, really, you don't have the authority to speak for yourself. You're not able to do that. I mean, immediately they open up. Nobody likes to be told that. But I'll say the other thing that does affect my ability to do this work, which I have thought about, and I'm not sure that my male colleagues think about it as much, is when I have gone off the grid to do some of this work, there are some safety issues that women think about that maybe men don't have to. Like, I've had sources drop me off when I've been in another country on very dark roads in the middle of the night at a distance from wherever I was staying, because they don't want to be spotted on security cameras. And then I've had to walk a couple miles back to my hotel on my own at night. That's a little bit tricky. That's not something that I like to do. There have been places where I've wanted to enter, like a business as an example, but I noticed that it goes into a basement and there's no kind of exit, and then I don't see any women present, and then I kind of think, I'm not sure I really want to go in there. So there are some safety issues that come to mind as a woman, where you have to make a judgment about how you're going to protect your own personal safety, that perhaps my male colleagues don't think about as much.
And just a final question from me before we turned over to the audience. You mentioned young women that you talked to about entering the field. I know there's probably a lot of young people looking at journalism as maybe not the most healthy financial field to go into these days, but it feels like journalism is a calling more than just I want to do it as a profession. Do you see a healthy pipeline of especially women and women of color who want to cover governance and oversight and anti-corruption and white-collar crime?
There is. The trick, and our challenge as an industry, is to make sure that we make room for them, that they receive the appropriate amount of mentoring from, you know, more experienced staff. You know, I think mid-career journalists such as myself need to do a better job of mentoring young people and making sure that they feel included. Newsroom cultures need to change. We need to make more room for women and visible minorities and other minorities, particularly in parts of the newsroom that have not traditionally been diverse, and that includes business sections. So there's a lot of work that we need to do as an industry. There's an acknowledgement of that because the problem isn't the pipeline. The problem isn't a lack of interest from young visible minorities and young women. Like, that's not the issue. The problem is they come in, they expect a level playing field, as they should. They expect an opportunity to learn and grow. And so we need to be doing more as an industry to make sure that they find their place and that they feel properly supported.
Great, thanks. We've already got a few questions piling up. And as usual, Zoom is messing with me by making the text really awkward to read. So we'll try reading this first from Peter Dent. Rita mentioned the dependency on illicit financial flows into Canada. I agree, but it's hard to define the amount and how it's impacting our economy. Okay, not so much a question, but a comment from Peter. You know, defining, just going back to this, the scale. Do things like the Corruption Perceptions Index, any rankings, is there any data you're turning to as a journalist to try and give you a sense of scale? Is it a gut feeling based on the amount of cases? How do you convey to your readers that this is bigger than as you said, bigger than we're realizing?
Yeah, well, so whenever there's a new report that comes out that provides some sort of an indication of, you know, how bad this problem is, we jump all over it. But I mean, it seems though that we're pointing to the same sources over and over and over again. So a lot of the responsibility then becomes on us as journalists to show rather than just tell how bad you know, or to kind of demonstrate the scope of a problem in a particular story. So, you know, what are the dynamics that are at play? That helps to let the reader know, you know, like, how much money are we talking about here? In the case of Saadi Gaddafi's penthouse, as an example, you know, we took what he purchased the property for, the value that he bought that penthouse at in 2008, then, you know, looked at the municipal data for the real-time assessment of what that property was worth, but then also looked at kind of, you know, publicly available property listings that were on sale for penthouses of that similar size in that same waterfront community, just to give the sense to the reader that, okay, so he paid 1.55 million for it back in 2008. You know, the impact system suggests that the real-time value is maybe just over $2 million. But if you look at some of the listings that are in that neighborhood, it's, you know, like a penthouse condominium of that size could easily go for, you know, almost $4 million. So just to think creatively about how you present the scope of a problem.
From Noah, we have you heard concerns that STRs provide enabler categories to abdicate their liability by filling out a form and sending it to a regulatory agency to deal with? To that, regulatory agencies globally seem to be completely overwhelmed with the number of STRs and only get around to reviewing a very small percentage of them.
Yeah, so I've heard this from people who have said, you know, while it's an out for financial institutions and other reporting entities if they fill out an STR and say, oh, well, look, I filled it out, but then they don't provide a sufficient amount of data. I think this is probably why this information sharing proposal in the federal consultation is so crucial. I think there has to be some feedback that FINTRAC is able to provide to people in terms of you know, offering advice on the or feedback on the quality of what they're receiving. There has to be some sort of standard, you know, in terms of the quality of STRs they're receiving, but also, yeah, you know what, the number of reports that FINTRAC receives every year. I mean, it's just enormous. I mean, how, given their staff limitations and the resource limitations, how are they ever possibly able to kind of get through all that and spot kind of what they seem to be problems. It's an enormous challenge. So, there's that. Yeah, I've heard that concern.
From John Allen, we have, to what extent does some of the blame on lack of enforcement lay with CRA? Lack of will, lack of funding. CRA has a tendency to ignore widespread tax evasion, e.g. in the Panama Papers, and go after individuals. What's your reflections on that?
So we talk about this issue a lot in our newsroom. We talk about how in Canada, we're really good at going after that, a small fry Canadian who failed to file their taxes or missed, like paying like $500. The CRA will come down on you like a ton of bricks, but we're terrible at going after, large scale tax evaders. Absolutely, there's absolutely some truth to that. Is it a matter of a lack of resources at the CRA in terms of conducting these kinds of audits? Quite possibly. Does it also have to do with a lack of information sharing among various regulators? I think that's a huge problem too. I'm actually writing about that issue. I'm touching upon that issue in my column for tomorrow's paper. There has to be more coordination and collaboration between federal regulators, but also between federal regulators and provincial regulators on some of these various issues. And, until that happens, things are going to fall through the cracks, and it becomes very easy to hold up, a small business or an individual as a problem when that person is maybe just a regular run-of-the-mill person who may have made a mistake. But yeah, it is much harder to go after the bigger or the individuals and the big tax evaders. But listen, if they don't do that, if we don't see regulators do that, that contributes to the problem too, because I think part of the problem here is that, white collar criminals aren't afraid of getting caught. They're not afraid of our regulators. And I think the Americans in particular do a much better job of, taking up space and having a more commanding presence.
From Denis Meunier, this is interesting. What is your perspective on how much pressure do SLAPP strategic lawsuit against public participation are suppressing stories from being published? And we know that in the UK, we hear this from journalists there, that the UK laws are preventing tons of white collar crime stories from reaching the papers. Is it affecting your work? Do you see it affecting others' work in Canada?
Well, I've heard that from other journalists about the SLAPP lawsuits. There's how would I describe this? There's legal chill, and then there's PR chill too that we deal with. If you just think about it, a big publicly traded company will have an army of public relations people who, job it is to obstruct you from, writing the story. They'll do everything they can to persuade you not to do it. I've had companies hire private investigators to go through my trash, or law firms to call me up and say, it's all part of the intimidation tactics. I've had legal letters sent to the Globe and Mail over stories that I've written saying, you're breaking the line. If you pursue this, we're going to, take legal action. People will do and say all sorts of things to obstruct journalists, to create that sense of chill, so that you're kind of warded off. And, if you're a smaller news organization, that might be an effective tactic to threaten some sort of legal action, or to, get to obstruct journalists in other ways to try to intimidate them. But, this is why we need fiercely independent news organizations that are well backed and well financed, because in those sorts of situations, when you know that your organization has your back and you know that you've done all the things that you're supposed to do, you've done your due diligence as a journalist, then you don't wither under that pressure.
From David Hutton, we have, and we're getting close to time, so apologies if I don't get everyone's questions. I see a number of them coming through, which is great. Everyone's very interested. I have seen some remarkable developments in journalism, such as highly organized international cooperation in analyzing and reporting on massive data leaks. Of course, the Panama Papers, and new media that does nothing but investigative journalism, and then I believe selling their stories to other media. What changes have you seen, and what do you see as the future of journalism in our new online world?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, some of these consortiums have done some excellent work in terms of bringing issues to light. I personally have conversations with journalists in other countries on a regular basis. I think that I just introduced one of our editors to a journalist that has worked in Asia just yesterday, because I think this person, even though doesn't have is kind of new to the country, I think brings a perspective of covering white collar crime from Asia, and I think I see great potential for collaboration with individuals such as him. So I think those types of partnerships are effective. Of course, the challenge is, do all news organizations hold themselves to the same standards in terms of reporting? You have to be really, really clear that everybody is playing by the same set of rules. Because I know when I go to my editors, they're going to ask me, how do you know this? Why is this person telling you this? What have you done to extend a right of reply? Tell me about all the steps that you've taken. And if they're not satisfied with the responses that I'm giving, the story doesn't make it to print. I can't vouch for the due diligence process that takes place at another news organization. And I think that's where it becomes a little bit tricky. And that's why you might see when, one news organization has a massive scoop on something, the others don't necessarily follow right away, because we have to take responsibility for what we publish. And so if we're not able to verify that information independently, it can become a little bit tricky. That might be the one barrier.
Right. We've come to the end of the questions, and I just want to give our outgoing chair, Susan Cote-Freeman, this is impromptu. Susan, do you have any, I want to give you a chance to monopolize the space if you have any questions for Rita, or any comments on the state of white collar crime journalism?
Yeah, thank you, James. I'm not sure it's a question, but you talked a lot about the support you get at the Globe and Mail. We know that most journalists don't have that support, and they don't have the financial backing to be able to delve into stories the way you do, because that's like patient money, right? It takes a long time to write those stories, to research them. And so there is that resource that's not there. And then the other thing is that I think all journalists now are really forced to feed the beast, so to speak. So they have to produce stories for the newspaper, and it's the web, and it's Twitter and whatever. And I'm just wondering, with these added burdens, where you see journalism going. And we know as TI, we say that a free press is critical to fighting corruption, but where do you see all this going?
Well, I mean, I think it's really up to us as journalists to fight these fights on a daily basis. Do we really need to write about this piece of commodity news, or is my time better spent focusing on something that is exclusive and unique to us? There's a lot of concern about, AI and how that is going to displace journalists. And the Globe and Mail has recently put out its own policy on AI. But here's the thing that AI can't do. AI can't, at least not yet, unless they find a way to clone me. AI cannot replicate the journalist confidential source relationship that comes with months or years of nurturing a relationship. I mean, my absolute best stories have not come from social media. They have not come from publicly available information. It has come from me forging relationships and meeting people in person, people who've gotten to know me over a period of time, people who trust me and who provide reams of documentation, people who have risked their lives in some cases to come forward. I've had confidential sources of mine that have been threatened, so AI can't replicate that. I see that there is, as much as there's doom and gloom, I do see that there is still a lot of room and a huge need for what we call enterprise investigative journalism, the kinds of things that, you're not going to get for free just randomly on the web. And that's where, my time and attention is focused on. And I will fully acknowledge that I'm in a privileged position here at the Globe because I'm a senior person here, and they give me a lot of latitude to do what I'd like to write about and what I want to cover. Like, as I said before, let's make room for these younger people. Sure, everybody has to pay their dues, but let's create a meaningful path forward and make sure there's enough training opportunities for them so that they can pursue some of these stories too.
Great, thanks. That's a great note to end on. And buy newspapers, everybody. We need to support newspapers.
Indeed, Rita, this has been a great conversation about the state of white collar crime in Canada, what needs to be done, but also the importance of covering it, how to cover it, and how to get the message across. Which, of course, TI Canada, we try and do and educate Canadians all the time and bring that new data, as you say. So we're not just citing the exact same thing over. And our relationship with journalists, of course, we're all independent, but that cycle of our work of producing new research that can feed into that background data that you do for your investigations, and then your investigations help us with the case studies that show the tangible practicalities of anti-corruption. So we rely on journalists' work, and I think based on the amount we get quoted, journalists do find our work useful. So it's something that I hope, just as I asked, what's the state of coverage of white collar crime? I do hope it's something that we can continue to amplify with journalists in Canada like yourself to show Canadians why it's important, and not just the doom and gloom, as you said, but how to actually solve it, and that this is not just a forever separate set of rules that somebody else gets to play by, and we should all just resign to cynicism. So thank you so much for your work that you do, Rita. Thanks for talking with us today. Floor is yours for final closing thoughts.
No, just, thank you for everything that you do. I look forward to collaborating more with TI Canada on this issue going forward. I mean, solutions-based work is really important. We just, as journalists, we don't just want to say this is a problem. We want to present what the solutions are. That's why we do this. It's not, it's not for the money. Everybody hates us, It's not for the glory. It's to actually create some positive change. So I appreciate the solutions-based work that you all do as well.
Fantastic. Rita Trichur from the Globe and Mail, thank you for joining us for our keynote presentation for the annual general meeting for 2023.
All right, bye everyone. I should go file my column. Bye.
Yes, we're going to move to the formal part of the AGM. I just want to remind people who are not paid up members of TI Canada that they must exit at this stage because there is voting going on and only paid up members can vote. So I will trust that only members have remained on the call, and I would like to call the 26th AGM of TI Canada to order. So welcome everyone. And let's start with the agenda of the meeting. Are there any, we have a motion to pass an agenda. Are there any questions or comments about the agenda? I'm not seeing any. Very good. So do I have a proposer for the agenda? Anar, and a seconder, John. Very good. Does everybody, any objections to the agenda? Not seeing any, the agenda is approved. Thank you very much. Item number 2 is a motion to approve the minutes of the 25th annual general meeting. Those were circulated a while back when this invitation came. Are there any questions or comments or anything else regarding last meeting's agenda, the last AGM's agenda? Not seeing any. Very good. Do I have someone to propose the approval of the minutes? Toby, a seconder. Corinne, thank you. Very good. Any objections to the agenda? I'm doing objections because I think it's easier to ask everybody to. Not seeing any hands up. So I take this for approval of the minutes of the 25th annual general meeting. And let's move into item 3, which is James's ED report. James,
Thanks,
this is
Susan.
for information.
Yeah, this is a non-voting issue. Everybody hopefully was able to download the annual reports that there was a link to. I'll be succinct with my comments on this and open it up for questions for anybody who has it. As usual, a very busy year for TI Canada with a number of things worked on and achieved. The big highlight, of course, the annual report was put out about a week or so ago. And since that time, Bill C-42 on beneficial ownership transparency, we've seen pass the House of Commons and move to the Senate. And we will see if it gets passed before Parliament rises. And if not, hopefully we'll get royal assent in the fall. So beneficial ownership transparency, the call for a public beneficial ownership registry in Canada has been one of our biggest campaigns, and I would say this is easily one of our biggest successes. Of course, it is only a federal registry. We need the provinces to come on board. This doesn't solve money laundering. There's issues of trusts and some other issues. Of course, the registry needs to be implemented, but I would credit this as a massive win for TI Canada and our End Snow Washing Coalition partners in Publish What You Pay Canada, Canadians for Tax Fairness, and of course the Beneficial Ownership Working Group of volunteers who have helped us out over the years, and I want to say thank you to them very much. Additionally, in programming, we did a lot with our volunteer legal committee over the past 12 months, especially on consultations and putting out reports. We responded to TI's exporting corruption reports. We responded to the OECD call for consultations on Canada's phase 4 review. We put out a Canadian Financial Crime Agency white paper for the potential of such an agency coming out. So this has been a great credit to the power of the legal committee. We've always been looking for ways to leverage the volunteer power of our members as much as we can. Always looking for new ways. Hopefully we'll find new ways, but this is a great credit to the legal committee and the chair of the legal committee, Jennifer Quaid. Also like to point out return to in-person events that started off with the Day of Dialogue in November in Toronto after a couple of years of being online. Great success. As always, hearing feedback from attendees that they love the intimate nature of our events and the caliber of individuals who attend those and the open conversation. And for anybody who was in Toronto at the Day of Dialogue, we got into some very spirited debate at one point, but it was all in good nature to advance the fight against corruption. But those are just the kind of discussions we can expect at our events. We returned to Montreal after a couple of years. Thank you, Susan, for organizing our Montreal event that we had in April. And just last week, on Tuesday, last week, we were in Ottawa for our Integrating Anti-Corruption in Canadian Foreign Policy Conference that was met with massive enthusiasm from those who attended. Lots of idea generation, lots of networking that went on. So plenty of things that happened in this previous year, lots to look forward to, papers in the pipeline on beneficial ownership transparency from our legal committee in preparation of the OECD phase 4 review that'll come out. Canada's review of the UN Convention Against Corruption is also this year, so it's just the year of reviews. We've got a paper on environmental assessments in Newfoundland that we're tying up and should be out this summer. So a lot going on. Financially, our funding for the environmental assessment work has come to an end with that report. Our beneficial ownership work from Open Society Foundation, we are on the last year of our third 2-year grant from Open Society Foundation. So to continue our work on beneficial ownership transparency and AML writ large, we need to find a supporter for that. We are in a new grant on our Inclusive Service Delivery Africa project that TI Canada is part of, and we are liaising with Canadian stakeholders on lessons we're learning on fighting corruption in service delivery in Africa. And we're partnering with our colleagues in Ghana, Zimbabwe, DRC, Madagascar, and Rwanda, as well as the TI Global Health Unit in TI UK. So looking for more corporate supporters to help us out, more foundation money to help us out to get project money so we can do the research, as Rita said, that informs fact-based evidence and solutions as to what we can do. On a few other structural things, we changed the membership structure, and I think as a couple of people have emailed me about the status of their membership, we're dealing with a couple of hiccups. Technology is really working out for us at the moment in our membership management system, but we'll get that resolved. And then on one final note on structuring, for anyone who doesn't know already, I will be taking paternity leave as of July 1st until October 31st. And we have with us our interim executive director for those 4 months. I'm happy to introduce those who don't know him. Noah Arshinoff, who's on the line from Ottawa. Noah is an independent consultant for ACT Consulting. Noah and I were actually in undergrad together for political science, and we find ourselves crossing paths all these years later. Noah has been a great contributor to the legal committee over the years for TI Canada. He knows the organization well, and I'm sure that TI Canada is in excellent hands with him over the summer. Noah, do you just want to say a word to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Many of you I've met or I know. Some of you we have not had the chance to meet yet, so I look forward to that. And I do have to fill in for the formidable James Cohen for 4-month period, but hopefully we'll continue the smooth train and work of TI Canada over the summer months. So thanks, James.
Great. Does anyone have any questions about the annual reports or our work over the past year?
Great job.
Not a question, but a great comment, John. Thank you.
I should add that I thought the annual report looked really good as well. Not only the content, but the presentation. So good work.
Kudos
I think
to,
Angelica had a hand in there. So congratulations.
Our project assistant, Angelica Hasbun. Kudos to Angelica for pulling it together. Seeing no questions, Susan, I think we're good for this portion.
Good. So let's move to item 4, budget and finances. And I'm going to hand over to Emmy Babalola, who's our treasurer, and who'll give us a snapshot of our finances. And then we'll move on to the approval of the audited financial statements and the selection of our auditors. But Emmy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan, and sorry to join off camera. I'm just in transit today. So the financial picture is pretty good. We ended 2022 with a slight increase in our cash balance. We ended at about $250,000, which was about a 15% increase from the prior year. And the composition of that is we have about $130,000 in unreserved funds, $56,000 in reserved cash, as well as sort of an emergency cash fund of $60,000. So all in all, we finished the year pretty well. We're still seeing some of the benefits from the CEWS funding that we had in the prior year that was distributed during the pandemic. But we also were able to, as James pointed out, return to our in-person day of dialogue, which generated some revenue in both Toronto and Montreal. So going forward, we're in a pretty good position, but obviously always focused on fundraising. Our revenues were also slightly up compared to the prior year. And interestingly, the composition looks good. It's more ideal from our perspective in that we see a larger proportion coming from contributions and membership fees, which is unrestricted and gives us a little bit more flexibility versus some of the grant funding, which is obviously tied to very particular activities. So overall, a pretty good financial position. very focused on fundraising activities going forward. As James pointed out, some of our key sponsorships and grants are ending this year. So we're very, very focused on that going forward.
Thank you, Emmy. Are there any questions or comments on Emmy's report and the financial statements generally, which were circulated as well? James, did you want to add anything or?
No, I think I brought up the issue about, and Emmy reiterated about finances.
Yeah. No, I think we're in good shape. We obviously have to keep our eye on the ball of fundraising. That's a sort of a perennial concern for us, but I think we're in an okay position. So thank you very much, Emmy, for your report. So now we'll move on to item 4, which is the motion to approve the 2022 audited financial statements. Those, as I said, have been circulated in the package that James sent out to the members. Any questions or comments on those? I'm not seeing any. Rita, don't hesitate. I know you're on the phone. Please speak up if there's anything. All right. Do I have a proposer for this motion? Gina, seconder? Adam, I'm afraid you can't. Oh, yes, you can. You are a member, right? Okay, Adam. Right, and let's move to the vote then. Do I see or hear any objections to the approval of the 2022 audited financial statements? Not seeing any. The motion is passed. Thank you very much. Item number 5, is the motion to approve Clarkson Rubel LLP as our auditors for 2023. Do I have I think the motion is self-explanatory. Thanks, John. You're moving. Do I have a seconder? I can second. Do we have just a quick word on Clarkson Rubel? They have been our auditors for a few years now, James, haven't they? Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, for about 6 years. In fact, I think they've been our auditor since before I joined in 2016. Yeah,
and they've, on the whole, I think, done a very good job. So we're happy to have a motion to approve to re-engage them for 2023. And I'm sorry, who proposed? We had John, who seconded? Did we have a seconder?
You seconded.
Did I second it? Okay, sorry. Can we have a vote now? Anybody who objects to the reappointment of Clarkson Rubel? Not seeing any objections. The motion is approved. Let's move on to item 6, approval of new board members and approval of second term. I'm going to hand over to Gina, who is the head of our governance committee and who's led the efforts to recruit new members and is the keeper of our governance policies. Gina.
Perfect. Thanks, Susan. So similar to last year, we went through a formal process to look for new board members. We had, heading into the session, 6 positions we were looking to fill. The committee made a decision to fill 3 this year and leave 3 open to be filled next year. We didn't have any board members' terms ending next year, and so we wanted to help create a little bit more or minimize the disruption in the change of board members over time. We still have a good number of board members. The committee felt that being down 3 members and filling those positions next year didn't create any issues for us. We did a public call, specifically looking for skills that we'd identified as potential gaps from our skills matrix. Got a lot of interest, and the committee went through a process of interviewing those candidates that we thought might be a good fit, and ultimately ended up with our recommendations. One of the positions that, 2 of the positions that are being replaced is Susan, who is, this is her last year as chair. She'll continue on next year as the past president. And in her place, Toby, the board has discussed Toby Mandel stepping in as the chair. And then as a result of our process, the committee is recommending, along with the board, our 3 new board members. First being Adam Ross, who's no stranger to TI and has assisted with some of our research, but has a focus and expertise around diligence investigations. Also, all their a short bio is in the AGM materials that was sent out. So we're very happy to have Adam interested in continuing with TI, in particular at the board level. The second individual put forward for vote is Mark Garcia. Mark has a long history working in different unionized environments with First Nations groups, supporting and advocating for transparency and governance, and comes from the prairies, or well, sits in the prairie region. And Peter Donolo, who is a name that I'm sure many people recognize, longstanding history in advising governments, has great expertise around crisis management, PR, and how to really communicate strategically, which we thought was a great fit for the board. And then we have one board member who term is up for renewal. So board members sign on for 1 term, 3 years, with an option to be renewed for another 3 years. And Amy Sandu, who's been a great contributor to our board over the last 3 years, is up for renewal as well.
Thank you, Gina.
Just one other point with the as I said, we have a skills matrix. We apply different lenses of diversity. From a gender perspective, once we fill these new positions, we'll be a more balanced board. We are actually fairly heavy on women, so we need to add some diversity the other way, which we're very lucky. Most boards don't have that problem. So this is my final comment before we go to vote.
Nice problem to have.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Are there any questions, or actually to the candidates, or just in general on the process? Or I'm not seeing any. I wanted to add that actually the last couple of years although we've had a number of departures from the board due to, the normal sort of cycle of membership, and some people have had to leave for different reasons, but we do get a fair number of very good candidacies, applicants. So I think with our reputation, I think it's helped also attract good quality candidates to the board. So I think we're in a good position that way. So if there are no questions or comments, I think we should proceed to vote. Item 6A is a motion to approve Peter Donolo to the Transparency International Canada Board of Directors. Do I have a mover for that motion? John Allen, seconder. Patricia? Very good. Are there any objections to the appointment of Peter Donolo to the board of TI Canada? Not seeing any. This motion is approved. Peter, welcome. Let's go on to the next motion to approve Mark Garcia to the board. Do I have a mover? I can move. Do I have somebody to second? Corrine? That's right. Do I see any objections to the approval of Mark Garcia, to the appointment of Mark Garcia to the board of TI Canada? I'm not seeing any. The motion is approved. Welcome, Mark. And let's move to Adam Ross. Motion to appoint Adam to the TI board. Joe moves. Support. Do I have a seconder? Gina, thank you. Any objections to the appointment of Mark Garcia to the board of TI Canada?
Adam Ross,
sorry?
Adam Ross, you mean?
I'm sorry, Adam Ross.
Adam Ross, yeah.
Yes, any objections? I'm not seeing any. The motion is approved. Thank you. Welcome, Adam. Now we have to reapprove Amy Sandu because as Gina explained, she's served a first term, and it's a sort of pro forma thing where we have to reappoint the members for a second term. So do I have a motion to Do I have somebody to move the motion? So Patricia moves. Do I have a seconder? Jennifer, can I put you down as a seconder for Amy's reappointment? Thank you. Are there any objections to Amy Sandhu's reappointment to the board? Not seeing any. Reappointment of Amy is confirmed. Congratulations. Now let's move to item 7, the approval of Toby Mandel as chair of TI Canada. As Gina said, this is the recommendation. We do a vote to confirm, but obviously Toby has been basically co-opted to the board because we don't do campaigns or anything like that. And I'm very glad that Toby has raised his hand to take over the chair. I'm really looking forward to his leadership. But let's move on to the technical side of this. So we need a motion. We have a motion to approve Toby as the new chair of TI Canada. Adam, you're moving. Do I have Joe as a seconder? Are there any objections to the appointment of Toby as the new chair of TI Canada for a term of 3 years? I'm not seeing any, so the motion is passed. That's great, Toby. Congratulations. I think this brings the sort of voting part of our meeting to an end. And I just want to take the opportunity, first of all, to welcome the new members of the board. We're really happy to have you with us, Peter, Adam, and Mark. I know you'll make great contributions, so welcome and congratulations. And I also, I do want, as I'm departing, and I want to welcome, obviously, Toby, and I'll give him an opportunity to say a few words, but I want to thank James for having been such a great collaborator over the years. And I look forward to seeing what more TI Canada can accomplish. And of course, I want to thank John, Gina, and Joe for their contributions to TI Canada. They've really done so much. Gina, by being the guardian of our governance and going through all these recruitment processes, which were very time consuming. So thanks for all of that and for your good counsel. And Joe, thanks a million for your work on the West Coast and your work with the ACLP and all those terrific webinars and very instructive programming that you've done with your colleagues out there. So thanks again for that and for being vice chair for a period of time. So it's been great collaborating with you. And I know that we'll still be working together somehow. And of course, thanks to John Allen, who's also a personal friend. Thanks for all your contributions, John, and for speaking your mind and never hesitating to say what you thought during the meetings. We need people who speak their minds in these organizations. So it's been great working with you. And of course, we'll be seeing each other. But thank you for your 6 years on the board. I can't believe it's 6 years, but it is. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to, I don't know if the departing members want to say something, but please do if you want to. The mic is open. But again, thank you. And John, yes,
John.
please.
Yeah, just on my behalf, Susan, of course, and on behalf of everybody here, we wanted to thank you for your service. It's been terrific. It's been long-serving and really brought the organization to a new level, along with James, of course, and other board members. So thanks so much for it, and thanks to other departing members. Hope we can stay in touch. I hope we'll continue to support TI from the outside, so to speak, and appreciate being on the board. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I'm going to hand it over to Toby to say a few words as the incoming chair. Toby.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone. Greetings from Manila, where it's nearly 1:30 in the morning, so I'm going to be very brief here. No, I mean, let me add my thanks to John, Susan. I mean, you've done a really great job. I've only been here for 2 years, but it's been evident to me, and That's really, really great. I mean, when Susan first approached me about this, and I mean, her term co-opted, I think is the right one somehow. My first thought was, "Ooh, what am I getting into?" But I mean, after kind of thinking about it a bit more carefully, I can say I'm very comfortable that TI Canada is in great shape. So thanks again to Susan and James and others, of course, for that. We're a solid ship that's the metaphor fails me, but anyway. And I think, a couple of really strong areas, which again, were really apparent to me more or less from the beginning, is our, excellent knowledge of the issues. I mean, we really are leaders in Canada and beyond that, actually, in our knowledge base, and also our strong networks and the great respect that we're held in around the country. I mean, I think that's really impressed me when I first came in. I run an internationally oriented organization. We don't have much profile in Canada, actually, and it was sort of interesting and encouraging to me to see the respect that TI Canada is held in. And James mentioned the conference in Ottawa just last week, although it seems like an eon ago to me, but and that was really on display very strongly there. So I think that those are great strengths, and those are in a way the most important things to be strong on, the substance, basically. As Emmy mentioned, our finances are fine. We're in the black. We're not losing money, but we're operating on a very, very small staffing complement, about 1.2 person year equivalents, something like that. So I think that we do need to refocus. I mean, it's always a challenge, as Susan mentioned, to maintain funding, but we do also want to try to grow our funding base a little bit. It's not easy. I'm very aware of that. There's not a lot of funding in Canada for organizations focusing on Canada. My organization focuses internationally. There's a lot more money for that than there is for Canadian work. But I, so as chair, I kind of promise that we will redouble our efforts in that area, and of course continue our successes in the other areas. So I look forward to taking over as chair and to taking on this challenge.
Thank you, Toby. And I, as I said, I pledge all the support I can give from the side. And thank you for being with us tonight, because I know it's very late for you, so you've been rather heroic. So we're going to release you soon so you can go to bed. I think that if there's no other business, I will. Yes, James.
I'll not to keep Toby from getting to bed, but I just want to say a few quick remarks to the outgoing board members, especially because the ones going out started when I started. So first, just to welcome Peter, Mark, and Adam onto the board. I really look forward to working with all three of you. Adam, we've of course collaborated for as well the 6 years I've been working here. So looking forward to this new dynamic of collaborating with you. And to reiterate, Susan, Joe, thank you for all you've done on representing TI Canada out on the West Coast, and for your collaboration. John, your work on the beneficial ownership working group, the connections you've provided us with, especially in government and on foreign affairs issues, and your passion for supporting the organization. Gina, your work on the governance committee, and I know it was a ton of work for you to do, but all of it was incredibly appreciated. And not just that, but the critical eye you brought to the board as well, a number of things in your representation in Calgary. And looking forward, Toby, to us collaborating together once I get back, but you've got Noah for 4 months, but I'm sure we're going to keep up the strength. And so just a final note to Susan, it has been a fantastic 3 years working with you, Susan. I think you did an outstanding job as chair. It was a great dynamic to have a confidant and collaborator to talk to every week and bounce ideas off of, and kind of talk about the issues of TI at a global level and at the Canadian level. So I'm sure it's going to be great with Toby, but I want to be able to reflect on these 3 years and even the previous 3 years before you came on as chair, how great it has been to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And James, I wish you a wonderful parental leave. And I also wanted to welcome Noah. It's going to be great to work with you, Noah. And I think one of your first tasks should be to send the agenda of the next board meetings to the new members so that they can put them in their calendar because people are busy. So I think let's not forget that. But I'm being a little too bossy for an outgoing chair. I'm going to leave Toby. Toby can do that. Anyhow, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And apologies once again for the technical glitches, but such is the world we live in, it seems. We'll do better next time. And I hope you all have a wonderful summer. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.